You were told that if you could just hold on until the kids grew up, everything would settle. That once the noise died down, the fighting would too. That love was endurance, and endurance would be enough. But the truth is, a marriage is like a house sealed shut during a long winter. While the children are there laughing, moving, arguing, the heat covers everything. But once they leave, the silence becomes a light, and every hidden crack begins to show. This video is not about why people fall out of love. It's a map of what happens when the background noise disappears. Watch this entire video. You'll see the 3 quiet forces that dissolve a marriage after the kids are gone, and where the first fracture always starts. Don't relax. This is not the end of the story. It's the part no one warned you about. We call this the time capsule stage. It doesn't start with a fight. It starts with peace, too much of it. The house is quiet now. The routines are gone. But what you're left with isn't freedom. It's a stillness that feels staged, as if everything in the house has been preserved for a family that no longer lives there. You're not starting a new chapter. You're waking up in a museum. Symptom 1. You realize you have nothing to say, not because you've run out of topics, but because there's no space left for small talk. You eat in the same room, sleep in the same bed. But your sentences are functional. Did you get the mail? Do we still have Tylenol? It feels like speaking through a fogged glass. You hear them, but you don't reach them. Symptom 2. The weekends used to be full, not always joyful, but full. Now they're a blank screen. No soccer practice, no grocery lists for 5. And so you fill the silence with tasks not out of necessity, but avoidance. You clean things that aren't dirty. You run errands that could wait. Because being in the same room with nothing to do feels louder than it should. Symptom 3. You begin rehearsing conversations you never planned to have. You imagine confrontations just to say things you'll never actually say. You play out versions of goodbye. But when you're together, you say nothing. Because silence feels safer than the first word. You're not avoiding each other. You're avoiding what the first word might lead to. And this third symptom, the imaginary arguments. The emotional rehearsal is not random. It's the first sign of something older, something buried. And that's where we go next. The first crack is called the deferred self. It starts the moment you become a parent. Not all at once, but gradually. Like packing away pieces of clothing you no longer wear. Except in this case, you're packing away parts of yourself. Your spontaneity, your ambition, your sensuality. Not because someone asked you to, but because the structure required it. The marriage becomes a workspace. You divide tasks. You coordinate pickups, bills, school forms. You become logistics managers for a life bigger than either of you. And you're proud of that. You should be. But year after year, the version of you that once flirted, questioned, wandered is put in storage. You tell yourself this isn't the right time. We'll revisit us when they're older. But you don't revisit. You adapt. And this is how the deferred self operates. You become so good at postponing your own needs that eventually you forget they were ever there. You think you've grown up, but really, you've only gone quiet. Then one day, the house goes quiet too. The project ends. There are no more forms to sign, meals to prep, rides to coordinate. And now, it's just the two of you. Two people who haven't seen each other, truly seen each other in years. Two people who no longer know how to ask, what do you want now? The emotional consequence is disorientation. Like waking up in clothes you don't remember putting on. You're in your own home, but you feel misplaced. The person you're with is familiar, but only in the way old furniture is familiar once necessary. Now, unmoving. And worst of all, you start to wonder if I wasn't myself for the past 20 years. Was any of this real? But this confusion is only half the story. Because the deferred self doesn't break a marriage alone. It needs something to collide with. And that collision happens when two people realize they were never telling the same story. The second fracture is called the split-screen marriage. From the outside, it looked unified. Two people, one home, shared goals. But in reality, it was two lives running in parallel, edited to look like one. You thought you were building the same story, but your partner was writing a different script, and neither of you noticed, because the noise of parenting drowned out the plot holes. You both made sacrifices, but for different reasons. You both stayed, but for different fears. You both wanted more, but assumed the other didn't. This is how the split-screen marriage works. It thrives in the practical years, because efficiency hides emotional drift. You don't need to agree on dreams when there's homework due. You don't need to reconcile your past when the kids are screaming in the back seat. You just keep moving. But when the tasks run out, what's left isn't unity, it's lag. Moments don't feel shared, and they feel parallel. You watch the same movie, but you remember different scenes. You talk about the same decade, but you lived it from different angles. This is where the dissonance becomes dangerous, because now the question isn't, do we love each other? It's, did we ever want the same life? Esther Perel once said, most people divorce not because they can't be together, but because they've lived too long in the same story without rewriting it. And when you apply that to gray divorce, it lands harder. You didn't just grow apart. You kept silent while the plot diverged. You edited yourself to keep the peace. They did too. And now, there are two versions of the past, both partially true, neither compatible. Which brings us back to the time capsule. Because when the house goes quiet, those two stories start playing at full volume, and you can't unhear them. But the loudest one of all is the one you never gave yourself permission to feel. And that's where we go next. The third fracture is harder to name, not because it's rare, but because it hides in plain sight. It's called grief delayed. You didn't have time to feel it before. There were lunches to pack, deadlines to meet, fires to put out. So you tucked it away. The disappointment, the loneliness, the dreams quietly buried. You convinced yourself that was maturity. But grief doesn't dissolve. It stores. And when the motion stops, when the last child leaves and the house exhales, it returns. Not as a breakdown, as a fog. You find yourself staring out the window longer than usual. You forget what day it is. You replay moments from years ago, searching for clues. Not about your partner, about yourself. This grief is not about what was lost. It's about what was postponed. The version of you that didn't get to speak. The love that was never fully chosen, only maintained. The pain that was never dramatic enough to interrupt the schedule. And here's where all three causes link. The deferred self, the split screen story, the delayed grief. Together, they form a closed system. You don't know who you are. You don't trust what you shared. And now, all the unprocessed weight is finally landing. But every system has a weakness, and this is where it begins to show. Disruption number 1. Re-enter the room. This isn't about conversation. It's about presence. Once a week, you sit in the same room, no phones, no errands, no planning. Not to solve anything, not to relive anything, just to ask one question. Who are you now? At first, it will feel forced. One of you will bring up laundry, the other will check the clock. That's part of the thawing. You're not rebuilding romance. You're reintroducing identity. The person across from you is not the same one who raised your kids, and neither are you. This works because it breaks the task loop. In most long marriages, intimacy dies in usefulness. Re-entering the room interrupts that. You stop being co-workers. You become witnesses again. Disruption number 2. Rewrite the script aloud. Each partner tells the story of the last 10 years in their own words. Uninterrupted. Not to correct. Not to debate. Just to reveal. It sounds simple. But this is where most couples discover they were living in different movies. One thought they were sacrificing for love. The other thought they were settling out of fear. Neither was wrong. Both were silent. When you hear their version without reacting, something strange happens. You don't just understand them. You see how little either of you were seen. This isn't therapy, it's testimony. Not what happened to us, but how we remember what happened. At this stage, resistance shows up. You'll want to defend yourself. You'll want to correct timelines, explain intentions. Don't. This isn't about being right. It's about realizing how long you've been invisible, even to each other. And if you've made it this far, there's one final disruption that changes everything. Not because it fixes the past, but because it finally allows you to name what was lost. Disruption number 3, grieve out loud. You were never taught how to mourn something that's still breathing. But this is the moment to do it. Not a fight, not a closure talk, a ritual. You sit down, and one by one, you name what died. The first 5 years when everything was possible. The version of yourself who waited too long to speak. The intimacy that got traded for logistics. The tiny betrayals neither of you meant to make, but made anyway. You don't try to fix it. You say it out loud so it can stop echoing in silence. This is the hardest disruption, not because it's painful, but because it's honest. You stop pretending you're waiting for the marriage to get back to something. You start acknowledging that it already became something else. Now the picture comes into focus. You re-enter the room not to connect, but to witness. You rewrite the story not to align, but to reveal. You grieve out loud not to break apart, but to finally stop carrying ghosts. Together. These 3 are not a repair manual. They are a spotlight. One that shows you the real landscape, not the imagined one. You may stay, you may leave, but you'll stop asking. Was it all a lie? Because now you see it wasn't a lie. It was unlived. And the only way forward is through what was never said. So remember the pattern: deferred self, split story, delayed grief, then disrupt it with re-enter the room, rewrite the script, grieve out loud. But this isn't the end. Because what happens after the silence is spoken isn't always peace. The next stage is called emotional orphans, what happens after you leave quietly. It maps what no one warns you about: the ache of separating without a villain, without a fight, without a reason that others understand. Tap here, you need to see what happens next. And now be honest in the comments. What's the one sentence you haven't said out loud at home? Not the one that ends things, the one that finally names them. Your silence matters, but your truth matters more. And remember, you can't restart what's frozen, but you can choose to stop standing in the cold.